Do not give me money. Just get my kids to school. Jonathan Hayes stopped with his hand halfway inside his coat. Rain whispered against the roof of his black sedan, while muddy water slid along the curb of a gray Columbus street. Less than a minute earlier, his car had crossed a deep puddle too quickly, sending a brown wave across a woman and her 2 children waiting beside the school bus stop. Now the bus was disappearing through the intersection, and the little girl beside the woman stared down at her yellow coat. "Mom," she whispered. "This was my good coat." Emily Parker crouched beside her 6-year-old daughter and wiped uselessly at the mud with a tissue. "It still is, Lucy. But it is dirty." Emily looked into her daughter's worried eyes. "Dirty can be washed. Come here." She pulled Lucy close, then glanced at her 9-year-old son. Noah was watching the empty road where the bus had vanished. "I can miss first period," he said. "No, you cannot. You will be late for work." "That is my problem." Jonathan heard every word. He was 41 years old, owned a company whose projects reshaped entire city blocks, and had spent the morning thinking about a meeting worth millions of dollars. Yet standing 6 feet from Emily, he suddenly felt useless. "I am sorry," he said. Emily rose. Wet strands of light brown hair clung to her cheek. Her inexpensive coat was stained from the waist down, but her voice remained controlled. "You were not driving. It is my car. Then tell your driver to watch the road next time." Jonathan glanced at Lucy's coat and reached toward his wallet. Emily noticed immediately. "No, I can pay for the cleaning." "No, at least let me replace her coat." "Her coat does not need replacing." Emily checked her cracked phone. The time changed her expression. "What we need is that school bus." Jonathan looked toward his sedan. "Let me take them." Emily studied him carefully. "To Franklin Elementary?" "Straight there." Lucy looked up at her mother. "We do not know him." "You are right." Emily photographed the license plate, texted it to someone, then called the school office. Jonathan waited without objecting. Only after confirming that a staff member would meet Noah and Lucy at the entrance did she open the rear door. Lucy froze when she saw the cream leather seats. "I am muddy." Jonathan almost smiled. "The seats can be cleaned." She climbed inside. Noah followed. Jonathan looked at Emily. "Come with us. We can take you to work afterward." "I work at Willow Creek Assisted Living." "It is the other direction." "That is fine." "Not for me." She adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag. "My children needed help because your car made them miss their bus. I accepted that help. You do not have to fix the rest of my day." Something about the sentence stayed with him. "What is your name?" "Emily Parker." "Jonathan Hayes." A faint expression crossed her face. "I know who you are." Before he could respond, she leaned into the car and kissed both children. "Noah, stay with your sister." "I will." "Lucy, go directly to the front office." "Okay, Mom." Emily closed the door. 20 minutes later, the children were safely inside Franklin Elementary. Jonathan returned to the sedan, expecting the interruption to be over. His driver bent toward the rear floor. "Mr. Hayes, I think Miss Parker dropped this." He lifted a white envelope, one corner darkened by muddy water. Jonathan took it without opening it. Emily Parker's name was printed across the front. Then he saw the blue logo in the upper left corner. His expression changed. Hayes Urban Development. Beneath the company name was a property he knew immediately. Maple Court Apartments. Jonathan stared at the envelope as rain tapped softly against the windshield. The woman whose morning his car had just disrupted was already living inside a decision his company had made months before. Jonathan did not open the envelope. He turned it once in his hands, then told his driver, "Take me to Willow Creek Assisted Living." 25 minutes later, he entered the modest lobby carrying the damp envelope. Emily was already working. She wore navy scrubs now, her hair pulled back, moving carefully beside an elderly woman using a walker. When Emily noticed Jonathan, concern crossed her face immediately. "Are my children all right?" "They are fine." Both were checked in at school. Her shoulders relaxed. Jonathan held out the envelope. "You left this in the car." Emily took it quickly. "Thank you." Her fingers covered the Hayes Urban Development logo almost instinctively. Jonathan noticed. "Maple Court Apartments." Emily looked at him. "What about it?" "My company is handling the redevelopment." "I know. You knew that when we met?" "I recognized you." Jonathan glanced at the envelope. "Is this about relocation?" Emily gave him a tired look. "It is about paperwork." A supervisor called her name from down the hall. Emily checked the wall clock. I have to work. Have you applied for assistance? 3 times. Jonathan went still. 3. I really have to go, Mr. Hayes. She turned away, then paused. And please do not make a phone call and magically move my application to the top. There are other families waiting too. By 10:15 that morning, Jonathan was back on the 31st floor of Hayes Urban Development, watching rain blur the Columbus skyline. Rebecca Sloan, the company's compliance director, entered his office with a tablet. You asked about Emily Parker. Tell me what happened. Rebecca sat across from him. Maple Court has 132 occupied apartments. Relocation services are being administered through our outside contractor under the framework approved earlier this year. Emily. Rebecca scrolled. 3 submissions in 7 weeks. Jonathan leaned forward. Why did none of them clear? The first was incomplete. She reported income from Willow Creek Assisted Living and evening work at North Star Office Services. Her weekly hours vary. One requested pay statement was missing because she had no scheduled hours that week. And the second? Income verification discrepancy. Her earnings changed between reporting periods. Because her hours changed. That appears likely. Rebecca continued. The third submission became an appeal. The contractor requested additional clarification. Her response arrived after the deadline. How late? Rebecca looked at him. 1 day. Jonathan stared at her. They closed an appeal over 1 day? According to the approved procedure. Who approved that? Procedure? Rebecca did not soften the answer. Operations drafted it. Legal reviewed it. Finance reviewed the cost assumptions. Executive leadership authorized the framework. Jonathan already understood where the sentence was going. Including me. Including you. He turned toward his computer and opened the Maple Court Redevelopment Archive. The project looked familiar in the distant way hundreds of corporate documents looked familiar. Renderings. Budgets. Timelines. Relocation projections. He scrolled until the final authorization appeared. At the bottom was his electronic signature. Jonathan Hayes. The signature itself did not surprise him. What surprised him was how little he remembered placing it there. Rebecca remained quiet while he stared at the screen. I want the electronic activity record, he said. Jonathan, a timestamp will not tell you what you understood when you approved it. I still want it. Rebecca opened another file. The authorization page had been accessed at 4 hours 36 minutes and 18 seconds in the afternoon. Jonathan's signature registered at 4 hours 36 minutes and 30 seconds. Neither of them spoke. Jonathan looked again. 12 seconds. Emily had spent 7 weeks gathering documents, checking messages between shifts, managing 2 children, and trying to prove that variable income was still income. He had spent 12 seconds on the page carrying the final authority. Outside his windows, Columbus looked clean and orderly from 31 floors above. Streets became lines. Apartments became blocks. People disappeared. Jonathan looked at Emily Parker's name on Rebecca's tablet, then at his own signature on the screen. For the first time that morning, he understood that the puddle had not been the first time his world had crossed into hers. It was only the first time he had been close enough to see the person standing in the water. Jonathan kept staring at the 12-second timestamp long after Rebecca stopped speaking. The number was too small to explain 7 weeks of someone else's life. Show me everything behind her applications, he said. Rebecca opened the underlying records. The first submission contained 3 weekly pay statements from Willow Creek Assisted Living, but the fourth requested week showed no earnings because Emily had not been scheduled. An automated notice had marked the documentation incomplete. Did anyone call her? Jonathan asked. There is no record of a personal call. Rebecca opened the second submission. Emily had added income from North Star Office Services, where she worked evening shifts when they were available. Her monthly estimate no longer matched the earlier figure. The system requested verification. So she earned too little one week and too differently the next. That is an oversimplification, Rebecca said, but not an inaccurate one. Then came the appeal. Rebecca showed him the request for clarification, the deadline, and Emily's response received the following morning. 1 day late. Why? Jonathan asked. The file does not say. At noon, he drove himself back to Willow Creek. Emily was outside beneath the employee awning, eating half a turkey sandwich from a plastic container before her break ended. She looked at him and sighed. You came back. I reviewed the records. I asked you not to move me to the front of the line. I did not. That made her look at him. Jonathan remained several feet away. Your appeal response was 1 day late. Emily folded the lid over her lunch. I know. What happened? Why does that matter? Because a computer tells me you missed a deadline. It does not tell me why. Emily looked toward the parking lot. Rainwater still gathered along the curb. Lucy had a fever. Noah had a science assignment due the next morning. I worked my shift here, picked them up from my sister, stopped at the pharmacy, made dinner, got Lucy settled, helped Noah finish his project, and then went to North Star for 3 hours because I could not afford to lose the shift. She rubbed her thumb along the edge of the container. I saw the email. I thought the deadline was the next day. By the time I checked again, it was after midnight. Jonathan said nothing. There had been no dramatic disaster. No reckless decision. Just too many ordinary responsibilities occupying the same 24 hours. Emily, I approved the relocation framework. Your company approved it. No, I mean my signature is on the final authorization. Her expression remained still. I checked the electronic record. The page was open for 12 seconds before I signed. Emily looked at him for a long moment. 12 seconds. Jonathan nodded. I'm not saying I only knew about the project for 12 seconds. There were meetings and reports before that. But the final authorization page was there for 12 seconds. Emily lowered her eyes to her lunch. I spent 7 weeks trying to understand what those 12 seconds meant. The sentence was quiet enough that Jonathan almost wished she had shouted it. I am sorry. Emily looked back at him. I believe you. Somehow, that did not make him feel better. But being sorry does not tell me where my children are supposed to live. Jonathan glanced toward the envelope visible inside her canvas bag. Let me help. How? I can review your case personally. Emily shook her head. Then I become the woman who happened to meet the billionaire. You need assistance. Yes, I do. The honesty stopped him. I need it badly. But there are people at Maple Court who need it just as badly, and they did not get mud thrown across their children on the way to school. Jonathan searched for an answer and found none. Emily stood as her break ended. You want to understand what you signed? She asked. Yes. She picked up her bag. Then stop reading my file. Jonathan frowned. What should I read? Emily walked toward the employee entrance, then turned back. Nothing. Come to Maple Court after 5:30. Why? Her tired expression hardened into something steadier. Because your paperwork can tell you how many apartments are affected. It cannot tell you who lives inside them. At 5:28, Jonathan parked 2 blocks from Maple Court and walked the rest of the way. The rain had stopped, leaving the sidewalks silver beneath the evening light. Emily was waiting outside Building B with Noah and Lucy beside her. Lucy recognized him immediately. That is the puddle man. Noah covered his face. Lucy. Jonathan almost smiled. I have been called worse. Emily gave him a tired look. You wanted to understand what you signed. Come upstairs. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of laundry detergent and someone cooking dinner. Children's drawings were taped beside apartment doors. Grocery bags rested near a stairwell. Several Hayes urban development relocation notices were pinned to a community board beside school flyers and bus schedules. Jonathan slowed down. Emily did not. Different from the presentation? She asked. Yes. On the second floor, an older woman struggled to guide a laundry cart through her doorway. Emily immediately took one side. Jonathan took the other. Mrs. Lawson, this is Jonathan Hayes. The woman looked at his suit, then at his face. Hayes. Yes, ma'am. She pointed toward a relocation notice on her counter. Then maybe you know if the apartment they offered me is close to Riverside Family Clinic. Jonathan hesitated. I would have to check. I have seen the same doctor there for 11 years. She adjusted her glasses. They told me the new place is 9 miles away. 9 miles does not sound very far, Jonathan said before realizing how the sentence sounded. Mrs. Lawson smiled gently. Do you drive, Mr. Hayes? Yes. I do not. The hallway became quiet. Emily watched him without rescuing him from the moment. I can have someone check transportation, Jonathan said. Mrs. Lawson shook her head. I am not asking for a ride. I am asking whether moving means losing the doctor who knows me. Jonathan had no answer. They continued upstairs. Near the landing, a man named Eric Miller sat beside his 8-year-old daughter, Ava, who was working through a reading worksheet. Emily introduced them. Eric recognized Jonathan immediately. Your company says the apartment they found us is comparable. Is it not? Jonathan asked. 2 bedrooms. Similar rent. Looks fine in the pictures. Eric glanced at Ava. but it is outside her school boundary. Ava held up her worksheet. Mrs. Dalton helps me read. Eric lowered his voice. It took almost 2 years to find a program that works for her. Jonathan looked at the child, then at the relocation notice folded beside Eric. Was school continuity included in your review? Nobody asked. Jonathan felt the 12 seconds return. Emily led him farther down the hallway. At another door, a couple explained that 3 apartments listed in their referral packet had already been unavailable when they called. One property required income they could not document. Another never returned their messages. What happened after that? Jonathan asked. The portal says our referral was completed, but you do not have another apartment. Exactly. Jonathan looked at Emily. She said nothing. He had spent years reading reports that described housing in terms of bedrooms, rent, mileage, and availability. Every category sounded reasonable until a person stood beside it. How many families are dealing with this? He asked. Emily stopped on the stair landing. Your report says 132 apartments. I asked about families. That is the difference. She pointed down the hallway. Behind one door, a child laughed. Behind another, dishes clinked in a kitchen. A television played softly somewhere upstairs. Your spreadsheet counts apartments, Emily said. These doors hold people. Jonathan looked along the corridor. Then tell me about them. Emily shook her head. No, why not? Because then you are still getting everything through me. She stepped aside, leaving the hallway open before him. You want to know who lives inside the numbers? Jonathan nodded. Emily looked toward the first apartment door. Start knocking. Jonathan knocked on 9 doors before Emily finally led him to apartment 218. Some residents spoke openly. Others answered through a narrow opening and politely declined. One exhausted man in a warehouse uniform simply said he had another shift in 40 minutes. Jonathan thanked him and moved on. By 7:15, the phrase affected apartments no longer sounded neutral. It sounded incomplete. Emily unlocked her door. Kids, we are home. Noah was already carrying his school books toward the kitchen table while Lucy placed her yellow coat over the back of a chair. The mud had faded after cleaning, but a faint stain remained near one pocket. Jonathan noticed it immediately. Lucy noticed him noticing. Mom said stains do not mean ruined. Your mom was right. Emily set down her canvas bag. The apartment was small, warm, and carefully organized. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator. 2 lunch containers dried beside the sink. A grocery list sat beneath a magnet. Nothing looked dramatic. That was what struck Jonathan most. This was not a life waiting for a billionaire to enter it. It was already a life, held together every day by someone who had learned how to stretch time, money, and patience. Sit, Emily said. Jonathan took the chair across from her. I want to make you an offer. Emily's expression changed immediately. Jonathan, hear me out. He placed his hands on the table. Hayes owns another property about 4 miles from here. 2 bedrooms. Better maintenance. I can cover the deposit, moving expenses, transportation during the transition, and the difference in rent for 1 year. Emily stared at him. And my application? I can make sure it is reviewed immediately. Personally, yes. She looked toward Noah and Lucy. For several seconds, Jonathan saw temptation on her face, and that mattered more than an instant refusal would have. Emily needed what he was offering. She did not pretend otherwise. Do you know what I have in my checking account right now? She asked. No, $187 until Friday. Jonathan remained silent. I need groceries tomorrow. My electric bill is due Thursday. Noah needs new sneakers before the month ends. I have been pretending the noise in my car is not getting worse because I cannot afford to find out what it means. She looked around the apartment. So when I tell you no, do not mistake it for pride. Then why say no? Emily leaned forward. Because Mrs. Lawson needs her doctor. Ava needs her reading program. The couple downstairs still does not have an apartment, even though your system says their referral is complete. I can review their cases too. Because you met them tonight? Jonathan stopped. Emily continued quietly. What about the doors nobody opened? He looked toward the hallway. What about the families working night shifts? What about the people too tired to explain themselves? What about the ones who do not know your name, or who would never recognize your face? Jonathan had no answer. I can help you now, he said. I know. And you are refusing because other people might not get the same help. Emily shook her head. I am refusing because I do not want luck to become your idea of fairness. The sentence settled between them. Lucy colored quietly at the other end of the table. Noah turned a page in his science book. Emily lowered her voice. Do they all need your car to splash them before you notice them? Jonathan looked down at his hands. He had entered the apartment believing generosity would prove he had changed. Now he understood how easily generosity could become another shortcut. One apartment, one deposit, one relieved conscience. The larger machinery would continue untouched. What do you want me to do? He asked. Emily studied him. You are actually asking? Yes. She reached into her bag and placed the relocation envelope between them. Stop trying to make me the exception. Jonathan looked at the Blue Haze Urban Development logo. And instead, Emily pushed the envelope toward him. Find out why your system needs exceptions in the first place. The next morning, Jonathan returned to Maple Court carrying a legal pad instead of an offer. Rebecca Sloan walked beside him with a laptop bag over one shoulder. Emily was outside Building B with Noah and Lucy, waiting for the school bus beneath a pale gray sky. Lucy noticed Jonathan first. The puddle man came back. Noah sighed. Lucy, he has a name. She considered this seriously. Mr. Puddle Man. Jonathan smiled. That is progress. Emily folded her arms. What are you doing here? Trying to find out why the system needs exceptions. He glanced at Rebecca. This is Rebecca Sloan, our compliance director. Rebecca extended her hand. I am here to listen and document what our process may be missing. Emily shook it. That sounds better than another application. After the children boarded the bus, Emily led them into the small community room near the leasing office. She had arranged for residents to stop by before she left for Willow Creek. Jonathan expected a handful. By 8:15, nearly 30 people had gathered. At the top of his legal pad, he wrote the language from the corporate report, 132 affected units. Mrs. Lawson spoke first. Her proposed apartment met the company's rent and distance requirements, but reaching Riverside Family Clinic without a car would require multiple bus connections. 9 miles is a short drive, she said. It is not a short trip when you depend on buses. Jonathan drew a line through units and wrote households. Eric Miller spoke next. His proposed apartment was affordable, but moving there could take Ava outside the school boundary and away from the reading program that had finally helped her gain confidence. Jonathan wrote Ava's name. Then a couple named Daniel and Maria Collins placed printed emails on the table. Our portal says completed, Maria said. Rebecca looked up. Did you sign a lease? No. Did you accept one of the referrals? We tried. 2 apartments were already unavailable. Another required income we could not document. The last property never called back. Rebecca typed quickly. Did anyone from the contractor verify availability before closing the referral? Daniel shook his head. Jonathan stared at the word completed on their paperwork. Then what exactly was completed? Nobody answered. More residents spoke. A woman working overnight shifts had repeatedly missed daytime calls. A father sharing a vehicle with his brother could not move farther from his job without losing the childcare arrangement that allowed both men to work. Another resident admitted she had misunderstood part of the paperwork, but had been too embarrassed to ask for help. None of the stories sounded extraordinary. That was what unsettled Jonathan. The process had not collided with unusual lives. It had collided with ordinary ones. His phone vibrated twice. He ignored it. Rebecca leaned closer. Jonathan, these cases do not necessarily prove misconduct. I know. Some may still satisfy the contract exactly as written. He looked at the residents waiting along the wall. That might be the problem. Emily checked the time. I have to leave for work. Jonathan stood. Thank you for organizing this. Do not thank me yet. She looked at his legal pad. You changed units too. Households. It seemed more accurate. Still sounds like a report. Jonathan looked down at the page. What would you call them? Emily glanced around the room. Mrs. Lawson held her medical folder against her chest. Eric sat beside Ava. Maria and Daniel quietly compared their emails. Names, Emily said. Then she picked up her bag and left. Jonathan remained standing for a moment. He turned to a clean page and wrote Margaret Lawson. Beneath it, Eric Miller and Ava Miller. Then Daniel Collins and Maria Collins. Rebecca watched him. This review is going to take time. Good. Good. Jonathan sat down again. Maybe speed is how he stopped seeing them. For the next 3 hours, he listened. By noon, his legal pad contained 29 names and 29 different versions of a process his company had compressed into percentages. For years, Jonathan had measured success by how quickly projects moved forward. That morning, he finally understood what the reports had never measured, whether the people being moved forward had somewhere workable to land. By Friday afternoon, Emily was sitting at a conference table large enough to seat 20 people. She had almost declined Jonathan's invitation. Missing even an hour at North Star meant losing money, and she refused to accept special treatment from Hayes Urban Development. Rebecca solved that problem by creating a paid resident advisory session with equal compensation for every participating tenant representative. So Emily came. She wore a simple navy blouse, black pants, and the same expression she carried into difficult conversations everywhere else. Calm, alert, unwilling to be intimidated. Beyond the glass walls, downtown Columbus stretched beneath a clear winter sky. Inside, a presentation glowed across the screen. 132 affected units. 89% processed. 81% completed referrals. Jonathan sat beside Rebecca while Senior Operations Executive Thomas Reed stood near the screen. Every additional week creates scheduling exposure, Thomas said. Contractors are already committed. Financing assumptions depend on site availability. Jonathan looked at the slide. Define completed referral. Thomas lowered. The remote. A household receives qualifying housing options within the approved rent and distance parameters. Receives options, Jonathan said. Not successfully leases one. We cannot guarantee that every third-party property remains available. Rebecca opened a folder. Then the metric is misleading. We found residents classified as completed even though none of their referrals resulted in available housing. Thomas looked toward her. How many? The review is ongoing. Then we do not know whether this is systemic. Emily had remained silent until then. She looked at the screen again. Can I ask something? Thomas nodded. Of course. Emily pointed toward the numbers. How many people are up there? 132 occupied apartments. That was not my question. The room went still. Thomas glanced at Jonathan. Approximately 280 residents. Emily folded her hands on the table. How many have you met? Thomas paused. Personally, yes. Resident engagement is handled through relocation services. So none. He did not answer. Emily looked around the table. How many people behind those numbers have any of you actually met? No one spoke. She continued without raising her voice. Margaret Lawson is probably somewhere inside that 81%. She does not drive, and moving 9 miles could separate her from the doctor she has trusted for 11 years. Ava Miller is somewhere in there too. She is 8 years old and finally has a reading program that works for her. Daniel and Maria Collins were called completed even though they still have nowhere to move. Thomas rested both hands on the table. Ms. Parker, I understand these situations are difficult, but we also have contractual obligations, financing commitments, and employees whose work depends on this project staying on schedule. Emily nodded. I believe you. That answer seemed to surprise him. I am not saying those things do not matter. I am asking why the families with the least control are expected to absorb every inconvenience, so everyone else can keep their timeline. Jonathan looked at the screen. For years, he had believed speed was evidence of competence. Faster approvals, faster construction, faster returns. Delay meant failure. But Maple Court had shown him another possibility. Sometimes speed did not remove a problem. It simply pushed the cost into someone else's life. Pause closure of every unresolved relocation case, Jonathan said. Thomas turned sharply. Jonathan, do not pause the entire redevelopment. Do not stop work already cleared. But no household without verified, workable housing gets classified as completed until an independent review is finished. That could affect the schedule. Then the schedule changes. We could be talking about significant costs every week. Jonathan looked at the legal pad beside him. 29 names filled the first pages. Then we should finally know what our deadline actually costs. Rebecca nodded. I can establish the review criteria today. Emily gathered her bag. I need to get to North Star. Jonathan glanced at the clock. Your shift starts at 6? Yes. You have 45 minutes. Which is why I am leaving. She reached the door before Jonathan spoke again. Emily. She turned. He lifted the legal pad. 29 names. Emily studied him for a moment. There are more than 29. I know. Then keep knocking. After the door closed, Thomas exhaled slowly. You understand what you just committed us to. Jonathan looked at the screen one final time. Not yet. He reached for the remote and switched it off. The percentages disappeared. That is why we are going to find out. On Monday morning, Rebecca entered Jonathan's office carrying a thick folder and closed the door behind her. There is nobody to fire. Jonathan looked up from the Maple Court notes spread across his desk. What does that mean? Rebecca placed the folder in front of him. It means Harbor Relocation Services followed the contract almost exactly. Jonathan opened the report. The Collins family was marked completed without housing, because the contract defines completion as providing qualifying referrals. It does not require Harbor to confirm that a resident actually signs a lease. Jonathan stopped turning pages. Mrs. Lawson? Her proposed apartment satisfied the approved rent and distance standards. Ava Miller? Rebecca hesitated. School continuity is encouraged during counseling, but it is not a required performance measure. Jonathan leaned back. For days, some part of him had expected Rebecca to uncover one careless manager, one dishonest contractor, one person whose removal could explain everything. That would have been simple. Find the failure. Remove it. Announce the correction. Move forward. So the process is not broken, Jonathan said. Not according to the standards we created. Rebecca opened another document. Harbor was evaluated on response times, referral volume, case closure, and schedule performance. Faster processing improved its score. Verified housing stability did not. Medical continuity did not. School continuity did not. Who designed these incentives? Jonathan asked. Operations drafted them. Finance modeled the costs. Legal reviewed the language. Rebecca paused. Executive leadership approved them. Jonathan already knew the next words. Including me. Including you. She removed one final page. There is something else. It was a transcript from an investor conference held 8 months earlier. One sentence had been highlighted. Jonathan read it twice. People adapt faster than buildings do. His chest tightened. I said that. There is a recording. Rebecca opened the archived video on his computer. Jonathan watched himself standing beneath bright conference lights in a charcoal suit, answering a question about whether resident relocation could threaten redevelopment schedules. His recorded voice sounded calm and certain. People adapt faster than buildings do. Our responsibility is to provide reasonable options and keep the project moving. Jonathan paused the video. The office became painfully quiet. He remembered believing the answer was smart, efficient, reassuring. Now he saw Mrs. Lawson studying bus routes to reach a doctor she had trusted for 11 years. He saw Eric wondering whether Ava would lose the reading program that had finally helped her. He saw Emily checking a cracked phone between 2 jobs while trying to meet a deadline his system treated as more important than the life surrounding it. People did adapt. That was exactly why his company had been able to demand so much adaptation from them. How many other Hayes projects use these standards? He asked. Rebecca looked down at the folder. 3 active developments. 2 completed within the last 4 years. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. Maple Court was not an exception. Review all 5. That could expose substantial costs. Then show me the costs. It could also reopen complaints we considered resolved. Jonathan looked at his frozen image on the computer screen. Then maybe they were never resolved. That afternoon, he returned to Maple Court. Emily sat outside the community room during her break, eating soup from a small container. She looked at his face and set down her spoon. You found something. Jonathan sat several feet away. I found who was responsible. Emily waited. Me. She studied him carefully. Did you personally reject my application? No. Did you personally choose Mrs. Lawson's apartment? No. Then do not make yourself the only person in this story. Jonathan looked at her. I helped build the rules. Then take responsibility for the rules. Her voice softened. That is different from turning yourself into their biggest victim. Jonathan looked toward the courtyard. I found a recording of myself saying people adapt faster than buildings do. Emily was silent for a moment. People do adapt. That is what makes it worse. She shook her head. No. What makes it worse is believing their ability to survive inconvenience gives you permission to keep creating it. Jonathan looked back at her. The words were not cruel. They were worse than cruel because they were clear. He had arrived hoping discovery would give him someone to blame. Instead, it had shown him something far harder to remove than a contractor or executive. The system had not betrayed his values. It had obeyed them. And for the first time in years, Jonathan understood that changing the rules would not be enough unless he also changed the man who had believed those rules were reasonable. 4 months later, Rain returned to Columbus before sunrise. Emily heard it tapping against the kitchen window while she packed 2 lunches and reminded Lucy that cookies were not breakfast. Noah searched for a missing homework folder. Lucy insisted her yellow coat was finally clean enough for school pictures. Nothing about the morning looked miraculous. Bills still waited beneath a refrigerator magnet. Emily still worked at Willow Creek Assisted Living and picked up evening shifts at North Star Office Services when she needed the money. She still checked grocery prices before placing anything in her cart. Jonathan had not bought her a house. He had not erased her problems with a check. Emily would not have accepted that ending anyway. What changed was larger and quieter. Maple Court redevelopment continued, but no relocation case could now be classified as completed until a workable housing option had been verified. Independent resident advocates worked from an office beside the leasing center. Medical access and school continuity were included in relocation reviews. Appeal deadlines allowed documented flexibility when ordinary life made perfect timing impossible. Margaret Lawson moved less than 3 miles away and kept her doctor at Riverside Family Clinic. Eric found an apartment that allowed Ava to remain in the same school and reading program. Daniel and Maria Collins signed a lease only after an advocate personally confirmed the apartment was available and affordable. Not every problem disappeared. Some residents rejected every option offered. Some meetings ended in frustration. Construction schedules changed. Hayes' urban development absorbed costs Jonathan once would have considered unacceptable. He trusted those imperfect results more than the clean percentages he used to admire. At 7:30, Emily walked outside with Noah and Lucy beneath a large blue umbrella. A familiar black sedan was parked across the street, carefully positioned several feet from the curb. Lucy pointed immediately. "Mr. Puddle Man." Jonathan stood beside the sidewalk holding 2 coffees. "For months, Lucy. I was hoping for a promotion." "Puddle President." Noah laughed. Jonathan shook his head. "Somehow that is worse." The school bus arrived. Emily kissed both children. Before they climbed aboard, Lucy turned at the top step. "Watch the puddles." Jonathan raised one hand solemnly. "I have learned." When the bus disappeared around the corner, Emily accepted the coffee he offered her. "Cream, no sugar?" I remembered. She tasted it. Finally, they started toward the Maple Court Community Office, where the monthly resident advisory meeting would begin at 8. Emily had agreed to serve on the council only after Rebecca confirmed every resident representative would receive equal compensation for meeting time. She did not work for Jonathan. She reminded him whenever necessary. Inside Hayes headquarters, one change had become impossible to miss. The old relocation dashboard had been redesigned. Names appeared before case numbers. Jonathan had resisted turning the idea into a slogan until Rebecca told him that sometimes executives needed reminders placed where they could not avoid them. A car approached behind Emily and Jonathan. Its tires moved toward a wide puddle beside the curb. Jonathan noticed first. He stepped farther from the street and motioned Emily with him. The car passed. Water lifted across the pavement and fell several feet away. Emily looked at him. "You moved before it happened. Lucy gave me strict instructions." "This is not about Lucy." Jonathan smiled faintly. No, they continued walking. After several steps, he said, "I watched that investor recording again last week." Emily glanced at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because I do not want to pretend the man who said those words was somebody else." Emily was quiet. "Good. That is all. What do you want, applause?" Jonathan laughed softly. "Apparently not." She adjusted the umbrella. "You made those decisions. Now you are making different ones. Both belong to you." They reached the community office. Through the windows, Margaret Lawson was already talking with Rebecca. Eric stood near a table while Ava proudly showed someone a reading certificate. Jonathan stopped before opening the door. "That first morning, I thought the worst thing I had done was ruin Lucy's coat." Emily looked toward the wet street behind them. The coat was washable. "I know that now." She turned back to him. "You did not learn about puddles, Jonathan." "What did I learn?" Emily opened the door. "To look before you move through someone else's life." Jonathan held the door while she entered first. He still had wealth Emily could barely imagine. She still planned groceries around payday. Their worlds had not magically become equal. That was never what changed. Power had simply learned something it should have known all along. Helping people after they are harmed may be kindness, but seeing them before the harm happens is responsibility.